So we intend to keep everything very exciting. But I have to tell you, the organizers have really overestimated my appeal to an audience by having me speak again. So I will try to say as little as possible. We have an excellent panel with us. The subject is energy geopolitics, Black, Caspian, Mediterranean, and Persian Gulf. I don't want to encourage Nino too much, but she's missing the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. But we will have a panel that is very, very expert in the region. We will start in the order of the positioning with Chris, who's going to tell us about BP's activities in Georgia, as well as an update perhaps on the southern corridor, TANAP and TAP, which, as you heard from previous panels, is the most important project ever. So we'll be interested in hearing about that. And then from the three countries of the South Caucasus perspective, we will go according to alphabetical order: Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then Turkey. So Chris, please kick us off.
Yes, good afternoon. We do have a job to do here after lunch, after such a stimulating conversation this morning. I want to start by saying, as Mr. Chow said this morning, he's a recovering oil and gas man. Oh, I'm still practicing oil and gas man, so I guess I have to raise my hand saying I have this, I'm 35 years with BP and a couple of years here in Georgia and working in this very important part of the world. I'm very pleased to be here. I just want to start out, I will say a few things about our activities here in Georgia and the significance of the developments that many of you are quite familiar with, and several of which have been talked about already today. So I won't deep dive into all the particulars that are happening, but I'll give you a high-level overview. But I do want to start out by just saying a few words to tie into this morning's conversation by Mr. Chow and others in terms of the climate, in terms of the energy world. Yesterday, we published its 65th edition of the Statistical Review of World Energy. And it's a very significant, very public document that comes out each year that it just takes a look, very factually, very statistically, at what's happening and what the trends are around the world. And so many of the things that we heard already today are indicative of what has been happening and what we're seeing around us. This report talks about that. I think what's interesting is there's been some surprises. If you were to go back just a few years ago and say, would U.S. shale oil and gas, or would U.S. oil and gas production grow the way it has, and you would never have dreamed this, and yet it has happened. And it has remarkably changed the world in terms of the energy consideration, as we talked about this morning. Another very significant consideration is the energy mix. Where is the fuels for the world coming from? Which ones are growing faster than others? And as we heard a little bit this morning, coal has actually been hurt the most, basically. It's actually had a big drop at the expense of the cheaper oil and the cheaper gas. So oil and gas will continue to grow, as have renewables. And a lot of that has been opened up by technology. And I'll come to this in a moment, but Georgia is no exception to that, and this region is no exception to that. So those are two very significant factors. Another third one that I can't help but mention has been lightly touched on today already, but is the carbon equation, basically, emissions. And I was just reading in the Statistical Review of Oil and Gas that last year was a neutral year in terms of hydrocarbon emissions, which was a first. And why did that happen? It happened a lot because the world continues to have an increase in energy demand. But the composition of the fuels is changing. And most people will know, probably all of you know, that the hydrocarbon, the emissions of coal is much worse than, in terms of CO2, than say is in oil, than say is in gas. So the world is going, even in hydrocarbons, to a much cleaner trend. And this region, and Georgia's been no exception to that. As you'll see, as you know, we're investing in the Southern Gas Corridor right now, which is all gas, okay? So just as this region for us started out as oil, it's very heavily shifting to gas, and we're shifting with the world as well. One other thing I'd like to acknowledge, we talked about today, is the oil price drop. It's very real, of course. It's been with us for some period of time, and as several have indicated, it's likely to stay that way. All indications are that we're in a period of abundance of oil supply right now, and energy supply, I would say, both with hydrocarbon sources that have been unlocked with technology and several other reasons, but also the slow percentage, but continued, or slow percentage contribution, but a high growth rate of renewables. So a lot's happening in terms of the energy balance in the world, and we factor right into that in this region. A few comments just getting into the region now, and say, well, how does the region play into all this? Well, the answer is the region's been all of the above. Every one of those items that I just mentioned to you, the region is very deeply impacted, very much a part of. The oil extraction, the first pipeline was built over 20 years ago, or now 20 years ago. 20 years ago, was the Baku Susa. It started in 1998, 1999, first tanker loading, and that was the very first of the oil pipelines. That was led to the BTC and the further extraction of the Caspian resources and the SCP gas pipeline, which takes us to Turkey as far as gas. And again, the energy that we're putting into the Southern Gas Corridor right now, why do companies and countries and political will all come together to justify a $45 billion investment over all those countries and over all this time with all those alternatives? The answer is that the demand is there, the market is there. Europe, as we know, as we heard from the ambassador this morning, the need is there for Europe energy. The domestic supply is coming down on their ability to produce their own, and the growth, even though not as high as in other parts of the world, the growth in demand for particularly gas is very strong, and particularly for gas in the portion of Europe and Turkey, as the ambassador mentioned this morning, in this part of the world is growing, so it's a very ripe spot for the gas delivery. So this region, with the Azerbaijan oil and gas hydrocarbon supplies, has played in very well, not just with the investment strategy, and that, of course, all the government and the corporations and everything to come together to make this happen, to get these birds in the hand. Basically, one bird in the hand, which started with the Baku Susa, has led to another, which is the BTC and the SCP, and now making the Southern Corridor a bird in the hand. Very briefly, to close out, the Southern Corridor is very much a bird in the hand. And that doesn't mean where everything's ready to start out. We have a couple more years of work, but we're 70% complete. Those of you that drive around Georgia, towards Giragosian, towards Lastavi, towards Talca, towards Akosika, by the Turkish border, you know that the construction is happening throughout the country and is progressing full steam. We are on track, we're on schedule, and we are on budget to connect with TANAP in the year 2018. And on the other end of things from Azerbaijan, the deep sea drilling that's occurring and the wells that are being delivered, very high technology wells, very high technology systems being applied for the subsea infrastructure are all progressing at a very remarkable pace. So we're on track, very happy to be essentially in this part of the world. It's a very dynamic part of the world. We understand the significance of what we're doing. It's not just us, of course, it's us, our partners, investors, and the governments of the region and beyond, of course, the United States and Europe and beyond that's making all this happen.
Thank you very much, Chris. Richard, maybe enlighten us on the perspective from Yerevan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's actually a pleasure and an honor because when we think about energy security in the South Caucasus region, Armenia doesn't usually configure into the debate or the discussion. But I will attempt to set the broader geopolitical context by looking at some trends and triggers and to build an argument of where and why Armenia should no longer be as easily excluded from regional energy development programs. But first of all, in terms of trends and triggers, we do see a rather diverse set of both positive and negative trends. More specifically, we do see a consistent Russian reassertion of power and influence in the so-called near abroad, which is being very much played out within the South Caucasus. We also see a determination by Russia to push back and to push out Western engagement. And in many ways, we also see economic instability mounting. Divisions and disparities of wealth and income have been extremely exacerbated by a decline in oil prices, which has particularly hit Russia and Azerbaijan hard. The lack of diversification and these underlying disparities are actually contributing to greater instability domestically. What we also see is positive trends, whether it's the outlook for Armenia and Turkey to normalize relations, or the reemergence of Iran, both in the region and globally. But what we also see, however, if we look more specifically at the South Caucasus, in the inward focus, I would argue for too long, energy has tended to distort democratization and economic development. In terms of, from an Armenian perspective, I'm actually very grateful that we don't have oil reserves. Our corruption, which is bad enough as it is, would be greatly exacerbated. But for Armenia, which has generally suffered from a degree of isolation, if not insignificance, exclusion now is dangerous in terms of first the negative implications. A recent round of open warfare over the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in April has demonstrated the vulnerability to conflict spillover. John Roberts pointed out very correctly the disruption of Baku-Ceyhan in 2008 is in danger of being repeated if the next Azerbaijani offensive is of equal scale, because the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the area of combat activities, is a mere 25 kilometers to the pivotal energy corridor into Baku-Ceyhan. What we also see, in addition to the proximity, is beyond oil and gas, the question of nuclear security and safety. Armenia is the only country in this region with an active operational nuclear reactor. In many ways, beyond its shelf life, raising concerns over long-term security for Georgia, for Turkey, and for Armenia. But in many ways, this crisis potentially could become a real opportunity in terms of cooperation based on and driven by the threat of nuclear accident. What we also see, however, is in the event of renewed fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh, a very real danger for not only a short-term, immediate, urgent impact on the flow and transport of energy, but even the longer-term impact on the investment climate and the triggers and trends for real stability. And in conclusion, I want to stress, in conclusion, there is no conclusion. This is a dynamic, not static process. It is fluid, and events are as rapidly changing as the flow of gas and oil from the Caspian. But there are two observations, if not conclusions. The first is, as interesting as our day has been, talking about the geopolitics of energy, having lived here in this region for 12 years, it's much less about geopolitics and much more about global politics and economics in terms of real security, stability, and the impact on democratization. And second is a lesson from Georgia, a rather painful at times lesson, that in many ways for lasting stability, individual Democrats are important, but democratic institutions are far more important. And Georgia is, in many cases, in danger of regress in terms of a deviation from the norm. That's why, even in terms of energy security, it's much instead of simply geopolitics. And one final observation, even from an American perspective, it's important to note Russia's President Putin is not to blame for all of our mistakes and shortcomings in policy, nor is the EU or the West in general, and certainly not NATO, the answer to all of our problems. That's rather dangerous and rather lazy, that kind of complacency. Putin is a threat. The Russian threat is clear, especially in Georgia and to Armenia for that matter. Yet, at the same time, it is too tempting and too convenient to blame all of our shortcomings and deficiencies in democracy solely and squarely only on Russia. We have to more look to ourselves in terms of building real self-sufficiency. And in this context, whatever happens at the Warsaw NATO Summit, the West is an important instrument and tool, but not necessarily the answer to all of our problems, nor to energy security. Thank you.
Perspective from Baku and maybe a bit from London as well.
Thank you. I would like to talk about the source and gas corridor and its importance and actual its challenge to Azerbaijan. And let's say the source and gas corridor is a very strategic project. That its east flank is a Tana project and the west flank is a TAF project. So Azerbaijan's strategy before the collapse of the oil was that despite its modest capacity of these two pipelines, the strategy was like the revival of the Nabucco West in the future. So it's like the TAF based on the share of the, based on the availability of the additional gas in the future could play to exporting a more gas to small market in Europe. So it's based on the using the interconnectors and to reaching more countries in the Europe. Today, Azerbaijan and in general, from Azerbaijan perspective, there is four challenges on realization of the source and gas corridor, in particular the TANAP and TAP project. The first is the financing, because Azerbaijan economic model based on the export of the oil. So the gross model is like the country, the government is providing money and the private sector is using this money. So based on that, since despite today the barrel of the oil is $50 US, but for Azerbaijan at least it should be 70-80 US that Azerbaijan could benefit from this process. So it makes a problem in the financing of the TANAP and TAP project. Despite the TANAP project is secure, financially secure, but still they need the additional financing. The second, there should be a part of this finance issue. There should be a European or the Western support. I mean, the Western foreign companies integration and supporting these projects. Unlike the Baku-Ceyhan project, which was initiated or supported mostly by the United States and the Western countries, the TANAP project came by the Azerbaijan and Turkish government's plan, which at that time there was the questionable how to revive, how to export Azerbaijan gas to the European market. So these two countries was weak and to put all finance and all total efforts to creating this TANAP project. But in terms of the continuation of this process or to reaching the point, it needs Western support. I mean, also the international bank credits, also joining a more energy component in this project. The second is the Russian factor. So Azerbaijan energy policy started in the 90s was based on the bypassing Russia. So Baku-Ceyhan was bypassing Russia in terms of the exporting its energy resources to the Western market. After Baku University, the first was the Baku-Supsa. In selection of the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, also Azerbaijan followed this line. Azerbaijan choose not to being a competitor with Russia in the same market in Europe. But since failure of the South Stream and then emerging of the Turkish Stream, so the question became that Russia would like to compete in the same market Azerbaijan is going to compete in the South and Eastern Europe. So this is the question that raised a problem for Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is not politically enough power to react in time to this development. Why it's problematic? Because first of all, Russia is offering additional gas to the countries with disappointed selection of the top. The countries that would like to emerge in the South Stream and this kind of project. And the second thing is that also Russia is offering such things that kind of the gas alliance that also some countries think that it's more beneficial becoming a transport partner like the Greece. For example, Azerbaijan and Greece agreed on the Azerbaijan acquisition of the 66% of the share of the Greece natural gas grid, but later it became that the Greece is really only 49%. So this kind of thing is that there is a fragmentation of the European countries on implementing the joint strategy on realization of the source of gas carrier. The third issue is the security. Security has two sides. First of the physical security, like recent mentioned that eruption of the kind of the Nagorno war or the full-fledged war in the Nagorno-Karabakh could be a catastrophe also the implementation of this the project. Not in terms that let's say the ballistic missiles can be used on let's say the traffic of this process. Also, it's also distracted investors to come and to join this project. So that's from their point of view, there should be some stability that not to distract their foreign investment. The second point is that critical infrastructure protection. As we in the first panel we discussed a little bit about how the three countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, is working on to find a way to protect more this the project. So that's why in this regard there should be a support of the Western countries, especially to NATO. And taking account that NATO in World Summit declared that one of the priorities should be protection of the energy infrastructure. So that's why we need to find out a way how to implement these things. The fourth point, the last, is the question of additional gas. So since, let's say, since the 2007 or 2006, there's a question of Turkmen gas, and how we will implement the Turkmen gas, bringing Turkmen gas to Europe via Azerbaijan to Turkey. But from my understanding, there should be two available sources for in the future. One is the Turkmen gas, the second is Iranian gas. But it's, my understanding is different that what we are talking today about the revival or the implementation of the Trans-Caspian corridor. First of all, Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan can be benefit from this process if they implement the gas project, additional gas project in the southern capacity field. So not only the oil, not only the gas, also the oil. So not, let's say, waiting a time how to implement the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline. Second, in terms of the Iran, I'm very skeptical that Iran will be seen Azerbaijan as a main export mode of exporting its gas in the future to the European market. It might be beneficial for two countries to develop in two fields in the Caspian. First of all, Sardar Jangal, which probably has gas and oil, and it's easier to interconnect with Azerbaijan. The second is that Algom and Shar, which since 2001, the two countries have a problem on this oil and gas field. So that might be beneficial to working on the offshore fields in the Caspian with both Turkmenistan and Iran. So this is coming to the end in my speech. I think there was understanding that oil is the money. So this is the all Occidental countries agreed of this about the gas policy. Countries like the Russia is used, but for Azerbaijan in the situation that financial situation, the gas become a problem, not a policy. So that's why if we implement this kind of steps that finance, security, and Russian question and additional gas, then we can come to the conclusion to seeing that implementation of the sourcing gas corridor. So I'm not talking about the Turkish stream, which I have also skeptic views, but I know that Professor Mitat will talk more and he's more knowledgeable about this issue.
Well, we're hoping that Mitat Bey would tell us about Turkish stream and everything else from Turkey's point of view. Thanks.
Thank you. In fact, you also mentioned a sort of weird title of the panel. This Black, Caspian, Mediterranean, and Persian Gulf, a sort of square or quartet, but I think it's possible to add the Baltic as well to this square and then try to create a sort of 5 regions or basins that are related to each other in terms of energy and security. And most probably Turkey is the best actor who can play a role in all those regions, including the Baltic region as well, just because of its NATO connection and its European Union membership, how can I say, dreams whatsoever. But this is the reality, and therefore it's not that weird. It is in fact to discuss all those bases all together in terms of security or energy security as a subtitle of this security apparatus for discussion. And in the early morning sessions, we were discussing this transition in the energy issues, and there is a sort of let me say a word of energy. In fact, entered a sort of transformation, a period of transformation. It's a profound kind of transformation, and in this transformation, the West is not alone. You mentioned already China, India, Russia, and the rest of G20 are the actors in this transformation, and they have their own interests, and they are trying to play a role in all those energy production, energy consumption, all those trust issues as well. And this brings us a sort of geopolitical setbacks and some other important issues, as well as energy security, let me say, some human-related security issues, food and water crisis, worldwide economic crisis, whatsoever. These are the main issues, and we are all related with those interesting topics as an academics who are trying to understand the security and energy issues. And in this transformation or transition, we have some kind of game changers. What is going on with Russia in Crimea, in the Black Sea region, and all those regions, security-related issues, Iraq's engagement with all those Kurdish issues, or Iran's return of international community, what's going on with LNG and US shale whatsoever, or Egypt, or Syrian issues. These are the big issues. But I would like to concentrate on Turkey in the first session, especially not to go to the details, but try to understand the Turkey's position. Because, you know, Turkey is a giant, in fact, in this energy issue. It's a sort of elephant in the room, and therefore, if you try to understand Turkey's position vis-a-vis the Caucasus or the Caspian or the Black Sea region, we need to touch the Mediterranean or the Iraqi issues or Turkey-Israeli relations, or what about Turkey, Egypt, or the Turkey's-European connection whatsoever. In this case, as far as energy is concerned, Turkey's energy policy is related with security and trade. And Turkey is just squeezed between those two concepts. For example, 5 to 6 years ago, it was very easy to discuss Turkey if Turkey's main priority is to be an energy hub, as the Excellency Turkish Ambassador mentioned in his presentation or speech. Turkey tries to be a hub, as well as, of course, supplies diversification by establishing some links with different actors. But to be a hub is an important thing, and that brings us many discussions, especially as far as the energy gas has concerned. And then in this case, for example, we were discussing that what about Turkey's foreign policy or energy policy? Is it trade-driven or security-driven? For example, in 1990s, 100% we may say that it was security-driven. And this was the reason why Turkey is far away from this Kurdish issue, Iraq, or Syria-related topics whatsoever, or Eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus issues whatsoever. But in 2000, a decade, let me say, it was a trade driven, and the security was in the back. But now, especially after 2008, of course, in those days, Turkey didn't get the signals very true way, let me say, as the Western world has, because of Turkish-Russian relations. But 2014 and 15, and especially the Crimean invasion and another war, of course, this played was very openly showed that it is a security issue. And the security and trade now are all together for Turkey, and Turkey tried to balance its policy making through those two pillars, trade or security, both of them. You cannot leave security aside or trade aside and move one direction. And this is the case. And then it brings us a big discussion. How Turkey's energy policy or energy security policy has changed, especially after this Nabucco failure, you mentioned again. Turkey shifted its direction. Now it's cooperating with producers, not the consumers. Beforehand, because of the European Union priority, Turkey's priority in 1990s or early 2000, the consumers, because it was helping Turkey to be part of European Union, a role to play in the European energy security, may bring a Turkey a sort of effective role or membership. But this Nabucco failure showed that Turkey needs to act together with some producer countries. Azerbaijan is the success story for us. Tanap project is the most important thing for Turkey. Of course, it brings Azerbaijan and Georgia to Europe in terms of security and trade, or the European membership, or Western alliance, let me say. It brings Turkey a sort of diversification and energy security. Whether Europeans are in or not, this is not the case for Turkey. Of course, it's important for Azerbaijan, but as a Turkish, let me say, if I am a Turkish decision maker, I totally support this project in order to serve Turkey's energy security. And then this is a success story. And this maybe was the reason why Turkey was so open, especially the president, at the time the prime minister, Erdogan, very open to Russian Turkish Steel project. Because it's again a sort of producer's project, and there are some people who ready to invest. And this was the reason, despite the fact that other actors say that these two are competing projects. Turkey proposed or defended its position that these are not competing projects, but complementary. Of course, I don't see any prospect for the Turkish Steel, but this was the perspective that how Turkish decision makers see the energy security and the cooperation between those producer countries. And the third pillar was, of course, Iraq or Kurds, and then Israel and Eastern Mediterranean. And what Turkey is trying to do now is to link all those projects and try to create a sort of cooperation in all those basins or seas, let me say, and to bring a sort of security both to Turkey and to Europe or the markets. This was the perspective. And it seems that the Southern Energy Corridor is the most concrete one. It's still going on. And I'm 100% sure that Turkish decision makers together with Azerbaijanis gonna finish it. No question. Because it's gonna work for all those security issues. And then some words, ending words for the first two. I may say that this is also important for Georgia as well. And Georgia is the most important actor now. It was, in fact, it has been an important actor, the most important actor for Turkey for the last 2 decades. Because as the ambassador again mentioned in the morning session, it links Turkey to the Turkic world. Azerbaijan has been in regions in terms of trade, energy, human interaction, whatsoever, anything. But Turkey links the Azerbaijan and other Turkic world via Georgia to the Western world. This is also very important. And energy security and energy-related projects are the main pillars of these kind of cooperation. And maybe this is the reason why Turkey is proposing and promoting and prioritizing trilateral cooperation. Not only energy, but trade and security and human interaction as well. But the energy is the main pillar of this cooperation. Therefore, in order to keep it intact, it's very important. But if, of course, we may discuss questions, it has an effect of exclusion of Armenia, but for Turkish perspective, it is a sort of not a stick, but help to Armenia to solve those regional issues and to move forward. Let me stop here. If there are some couple of questions, I may go through the Russia, Kurdish issue, and the others.
Thank you very much, and thank for all our panelists for these insightful comments. And I have lots of notes and lots of questions myself, but rather than go through and confuse the audience with my questions, I would invite the audience to ask theirs so that we have plenty of time for discussion. First question? Anyone? I have to say, that some of us love game changers. Keeps us in business. Game changers do. In retrospect, was Turkish Stream a distraction? I mean, it seemed like it was announced in Ankara, somewhat to the surprise of everybody, including, judging by the film, the video, and the photographs, maybe Alexei Miller himself, that after South Stream wasn't going anywhere, that after the sudden announcement of a project in Turkey that has no name at the time of the announcement, no route, and no gas price agreed, was that in retrospect a distraction for Turkish political leadership, and ultimately, of course, circumstances changed again, and it's no longer even thinkable. What do you think?
I don't know. This is a distraction, but when you go back to the date that the Russians introduced this Turkish Stream, the Turkish agenda or international regional agenda, for example, Turkish decision makers were surprised at this because we have Turkey in those days still on the table, but it's not effective. We have Turkish-Russian sort of high-level cooperation council, bilateral thing, and it was very efficient after this plane incident. And during one of the meetings of this council, and Russian administration offered such a kind of project. But from the beginning, it was the case that the amount of gas that they plan to introduce is huge. It's beyond Turkey's capacity or necessity, and the route itself is just touching Turkey's how can I say, exclusive economic zone, and goes through European market, let me say, in order to bypass Ukraine. Of course, I'm 100% sure that Turkish decision makers are aware of the fact that this is a tactical move by Russia in order to alienate Ukraine and to play with the European markets. But in those days, it seems that Russian decision makers never say no to Russians. They said, let's see what's going on and try to see what's happening on the field. It's not serves Turkey's interest to say no from the beginning. And in those days, again, Turkey was increasing its energy relationship with Russia as well. Just remember all those nuclear power stations, other sources whatsoever, and the two countries were targeting $100 billion US trade volume. It was a crazy. It's around 32.
But doesn't that strike you as doubling down on already over-reliance on Russian energy?
Exactly. This was the question mark. But from the beginning, those guys most probably know that Russia has no capacity in terms of who's going to invest a huge amount of money, how to deal with all those issues. And we know that European-Russian energy relations are in Spain and it's not well working. But it serves to promote Turkish-Russian bilateral relations in those days. Maybe it was the case, and it was not a distraction. It was a good tool.
I guess part of my problem with this recovering oil and gas guy is that investment conditions cannot change so fast because we're talking about long-term projects that take many years to mature and come to fruition. So at the flip of a switch, can't jump from one project to another with no idea of how to evacuate 63 BCM from the Turkish clean water to the rest of the European market. That seemed like a bridge too far, even at the time of the announcement, before the bilateral relations deteriorated. Richard.
In this moment, politicians love big projects, whether you can realize it or not. It says.
Yeah, I mean, my line is political projects never die, fade away. Richard, you gave a very interesting presentation, but I wonder to what extent is there realization among the Armenian political leadership that their energy isolation has not been a positive factor for them in the long run, and that being more connected, even if you have to build relationship over time in the immediate neighborhood, whether it's with Turkey or Azerbaijan or more easily, I imagine, Georgia, would be better than to be solely reliant, as it has been, on sources of water.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the question. What we see is actually the Armenian government, the Armenian political elite, has actually come to a very belated but very profound realization of the limits of going alone over dependence on the Russian Federation. And in fact, there are some positive trends. Armenia's exports of surplus electricity to Georgia and Iran from the nuclear power plant, and a memorandum of understanding that was signed between Armenia and a private Turkish concern over the potential surplus electricity going to eastern Turkey. Having said that, the bigger picture is a crisis in Armenian-Russian relations. Fortunately, from a personal point of view, it actually demonstrates the danger of overdependence on Russia. In the energy sector, however, I'm a little bit worried in terms of the inherent risk and danger posed by the nuclear reactor. And it's a VVER reactor, similar to a Czech model that was closed down by the Czechs, and rather dangerously overextended operationally. What we do need is more attention to rather significant already growth in alternative and renewable resources, especially wind and solar. But in many ways, we need to turn or transform energy from an instrument of exclusion to an opportunity for engagement. And for example, the future course of Georgian-Iranian energy relations depends more on Armenia, both geographically and as the link in the chain. The real threat to the future of Iranian's energy development with Georgia and with Armenia, the obstacle is not Armenia. The obstacle is what Russia will allow Armenia to do. And again, at the end of the day, it comes back full circle to the real challenge or limitation being posed by Russia itself. So in other words, Armenia, in terms of its government, political elite, our leverage is limited, our options are few. However, we are playing a rather weak hand better than before.
Questions from the audience?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully agree with what Richard said regarding laying pressure for real mistakes. And also regarding since the issue of NATO engagement, potential engagement in the security of critical infrastructure in the region, this issue was raised in the first session and now again it emerged. When Azerbaijani oil production is coming down, and we are talking about just 10 BCM of gas being marketed for the European Union market, is there any potential for NATO to be engaged for such small volumes of production? Or in order, my understanding, in order to help for NATO engagement for security, for assuring security of the infrastructure, we need at least larger volumes. We need to build cross-Caspian transportation network. We need more gas commitments for the European Union. We need larger volumes. Otherwise, this critical infrastructure doesn't exist at all. And my question goes to our colleague from Turkey. Turkey has approved South Stream and has given its approval on the building of South downstream and it's offshore. Now Eastern European countries continue talking of the kind of similar project, maybe under a different name, but probably meaning again the Russian gas. Are there any talks in Turkey on this subject, whether they would support the approval or they would rather withdraw the approval for the building of Russian gas pipeline across the Turkish offshore? Thank you.
On your first question, it's a really good one. I hope you ask the next panel that question. I think there's a problem of where is the institutional home for energy security in the world. We used to think of the IEA, but IEA doesn't cover everyone. It doesn't cover the largest importer of oil. NATO, as you probably know, has a very, very small group of people working on energy security. And what is the division of labor between NATO and EU regarding energy security is one of those areas that's probably under-discussed in terms of institutions that may have to be built in the future. We haven't talked about the Energy Charter Secretariat, that's another body where these issues might be discussed. But you're absolutely right that there is an opportunity right for someone to step into, and with all those institutions and member states that I mentioned being involved in sorting that out. We've done the question in Turkey.
And the question is whether the Turks are discussing or speaking about cooperating with Russia in terms of alternative pipeline, if I'm not. Yes. Okay, just two points to broaden your say. What NATO and the EU may do in terms of critical infrastructure in all those videos is most probably training and information or intelligence sharing. There is no NATO forces or other special units to serve, to protect those critical infrastructure. No, in fact, the answer is why? Because there is a complete lack of trust now in Turkish society, but it is worse most probably in Moscow. They don't trust Turks, and then all those both leaders, I think, do not move forward to support any kind of a new project. And beyond that, who's going to support it? If the European markets and European allies are ready to cooperate with Russia, and if there is a line or way to bring an extra and new lines, if there is an agreement with the Europeans and of course most probably with Russians, then there might be a possibility that afterwards, most probably Turkey would like to be part of any kind of project and may allow its economic zones or seas whatsoever. But you know, in Turkey there is no project, and Turkey is trying to diversify its resources, as it was discussed in the first session, for example. This is why we are trying to leave Russian gas, the amount of Russian gas aside, and trying to establish new links. And Turkish Israeli rapprochement, or Turkish trying to establish LNG and other ways of Qatari gas and the others are a reflection of distrust, if it is a big question. And if Russians come to Turkey to utilize or use those Black Sea shores whatsoever, if the European allies and NATO allows it, then most probably Turkey never say no. But I don't see any perspective, and we don't discuss in Turkey the third stream or any other kind of new streams.
Okay, I want to, let's say, to react this, what should be expected from the NATO. So, given the fact that NATO involved the protection of the energy infrastructure since 2006, when there's a stop-based program by NATO to 3 countries called Eternity. So, what we expect in this state is that, first of all, for example, as in the first panel, Zaur was saying the cybersecurity. So this is one of the components of the energy security. And for example, the Georgia is cooperating with NATO in individual ways with the NATO Baltic countries. But so there is no kind of such kind of cooperation of Azerbaijan with any NATO member countries. So it's a lack of capacity building. So there should be a way to strengthen the capacity of Azerbaijanis too. The second issue, I think, for example, there's a NATO training center in Georgia. As Giragosian explained, this is a purely Georgian the NATO base, but we should need a NATO excellence, energy excellence center in one of the countries just to provide this kind of trainings to these countries. And I can say that the modest capacity of the FAB is enough to say that its capacity is low, so that's why there shouldn't be involvement of the NATO or the EU in protection of the infrastructure, taking into account that in the next 15 or 20 years the capacity will enlarge based on the available gas from Azerbaijan. Also, this technical capacity should increase. And the second question, as Professor Celikpala said about the tap, let's say Turkish Stream, I would like to say a few things. From my understanding is that Turkish Stream is a mirror image of the tap. Because I don't see any problem as exporting Russian gas to the Turkish territory, but then Russia aimed to export its gas to the European market without having any infrastructure and without having any regulation law how to export from the Turkish Greece border to Europe. So that's why Azerbaijan is concerned, because the Russian also declared that we can use the tap capacity to exporting Russian gas to the European market. So this is the one thing. The second thing is that the idea that Russia would like to export its gas via Turkey to Greece and then the European market, that's opening a problem or establishing a problem with Azerbaijan's relationship with Greece. Or Greece is playing this way. So let's say that's why, for example, Russia could not like to see the Azerbaijan acquiring this far in Greece, or Azerbaijan investments in Greece more or Albania. So that's Russia will see this more competition. So that's why I'm skeptic that the Turkish Stream in this way. Otherwise, let's say, until the reaching to the point of the Greece-Turkish border, I see the TANAP and
but this does not bother Azerbaijan. The important partner in TANAP, that is Turkey, seems to have been distracted by what, according to you, was a Russian camp.
Yeah. But if you ask this question to the Azerbaijan government, they will say you exactly that we don't see Turkish Stream yet. So we saw only the memorandum of understanding between the two sides. So we don't see how they are going to implement. So that's why they have concern for future, but not for now. So,
Chris, physical security of pipelines have come up a number of times today. I was wondering if you could share the industry perspective. To what extent are you concerned? I don't know what happened in 2008. There was the bombing near the pipeline with a mistake, shot across the bow, or how does one interpret it? And to what extent are you taking measures to protect yourself?
Thank you. I guess I'll start by saying, I'm going to be a bit of an engineer on here, that hydrocarbons are in pipe and they're under pressure, and they want out of the pipe. Okay? What does that mean for an oil and gas company when you're operating? What it means is it's your job to keep them into the pipe, because we all know it's very bad when it gets out, other than when it gets out to a tanker through the terminal, right? That's pretty simple. There's the fundamentals. But the reason I say that is there's a lot of things that are out there at risk that we have to manage our risk in terms of oil and gas production. Everything that happens from the drilling of the wells in the Caspian Sea and the containment that occurs there, all the way through the pipelines across the country, through the various mountains of Georgia, through Turkey, etc. So there's a lot of risks that occur that could damage our operations. For example, an earthquake. I've worked a lot of my career in Alaska. We had very big earthquakes in Alaska. You worry about an earthquake, you design for them the best you can, but you're also able to respond to those. A big river event, an in terms of a flood and where your pipelines are crossing rivers. Again, to be designed for the protection, but what are we doing in all these cases? We're managing risk. Now, some things we have more control on, and we can be more engineered for than other things. Okay, now, attacks, criminal events, terrorist events are not controllable by us, but what are they? They're a risk to our operation. And what are we? An operation, or an engineered operation. Why do I say that? Because we have systems in our pipelines, in our connection infrastructure, that allows us to respond to any unknown event. So as soon as something unknown occurs, and in this case, let's say it's a terrorist attack, then we have levels of protection that we implement that can shut down. But first and foremost, we always have these same priorities, and I'm sure it's the same priorities for many governments and most companies, I would say. You start with your people, then your environment, and then your business, and then your property. Okay? That doesn't change anywhere in the world that we operate. So, bottom line is we will shut down whenever we're at threat or we're considered to be at risk. So in this case, the events that were cited, the examples that have been given in the past, some back in 2008, some of the events that happened last August, basically in Turkey, these are events. The companies that operate, ourselves in Georgia and Azerbaijan, but of course other companies in other parts of the world, we respond accordingly. Governments respond to attacks that are criminal or terrorist related and make it safe, and we go in and we fix the problem and we put the pipeline back in service. So for every one of these events that occurs, these pipelines are all still operating, and as the Ambassador said this morning, the ETC operates very reliably. STP, STC, and the back of the streets are some of the most reliable pipelines in the world. Yes, if we get an attack, we have to be ready for that. We have to respond, and we know what to do. It starts with shutting it down, making it safe, keeping the people safe, making sure the environment is taken care of, and then we worry about how to make it repair and put it back in service.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Back.
Hello. Thank you very much for your very informative presentation. I would like to ask one quick question. I represent the investors party here. So my question was on what are the prospects of Georgia of exporting electricity to Armenia, and this goes out to your question, in coming 5 to 8 years, because this is not being stressed enough, and I feel like it should be stressed more. If Armenia is experiencing a deficit in electricity, we have excess electricity, moreover in May and June when Turkey has those kind of limitations on how much we can export. So yeah, that's, thank you.
Richard, you want to take that one? Question.
Very briefly, what we see is tremendous progress only in the past several years between the connection of the electricity transmission lines between Armenia and Georgia and also Armenia and Iran. And in fact, we do have a consistent record of seasonal electricity swaps or sales on both sides on the Armenian-Iranian border, and also consistent Armenian exports of surplus electricity into the Georgian power grid. More than that, we should expect at least the potential for Armenian electricity going to Turkey, but dependent on when and if the Turkish government opens the border and normalizes relations. More than that, I don't think there's much going on.
Richard, does the general opening of Iran to international commerce, does that present the opportunity for Armenia in terms of creating some more space to maneuver, given that, at least in theory, Russia is in favor of that, also that we can, and then we can do it with Iran, we can do it with other people as well, or is that kind of a dream on my part?
If we look at Iran, this is also important for Georgia in terms of a better understanding both the opportunity but the limitations. In many ways, Armenia is usually a victim of its geography. In this context, however, it's a beneficiary. In terms of Armenia is the only stable, reliable neighbor of Iran. From an Iranian perspective, Armenia is essential to overcome isolation, especially given Iraq and Afghanistan on this east-west axis. Having said that, energy and transport are the most logical areas for Armenia and Iran to deepen cooperation, but they're the least likely, given Russia's position in terms of Russia already succeeded in limiting the diameter of the existing operational gas pipeline between Armenia and Iran, which is now the size of a straw, to prevent re-export and to not introduce an element of competition to Gazprom. Having said that, there are opportunities. Niche consumer goods, economics, IT, there is tremendous potential. From an Iranian perspective, however, Armenia per se is simply too small. But it's Armenia's role as a platform or a bridge into the Eurasian Economic Union and beyond. And in fact, it also increases our bargaining power in Armenia in terms of giving us greater leverage regarding Moscow and, to be honest, regarding Tbilisi. And in that regard, Armenia is able to potentially overcome the limitations. But let's be honest, all three countries of this region far too often have been the Palestinians of the South Caucasus, never missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So at the end of the day, it requires greater statesmanship, which has generally been the endangered species in this region.
So energy wouldn't be the first, but it would be one of the latest stages of building blocks towards larger.
Because of Russia's right.
Okay, gentlemen in the back.
Thank you to all the speakers. My name is Arsen Karacan. I run an Armenian language radio here in Georgia. Just a quick comment for the last statement on the slow cycle of the pipeline from Iran, which is roughly 40 centimeters. As the former foreign minister of Armenia is writing his memoirs, it was a tightrope walk for the Armenian diplomacy because they had to juggle between Russia and the US in order to be able to even have it both. Now, whatever that is, it is the reality. I have two questions. I sort of hear missing the elephant in the room from our BP colleague on calling this terrorist attacks possible or criminal attacks. I have a straightforward question about the early April when the AK escalation happened. Were you on alert? Was the BP on alert here in Georgia while the escalation in Nagorno-Karabakh was happening? Because it's been speculated for a long time that, God forbid, obviously, anything to spill over to Georgia. But are you generally worried by not only South Ossetia and Abkhazia conflict, but also the Karabakh conflict as a reflection on the general function of the pipeline? And a second question quickly to our Christian Azerbaijani colleagues, and maybe Richard can comment on that as well. Do you see an empowered, pressure on Georgian government by having 90% of the gas provided by Azerbaijan on Georgia? As I hear from many Georgians here, obviously there are pressures when it comes to making political decisions. Does Azerbaijan see the amount of gas that it provides to Georgia as a leverage to the Thank you.
Well, of course, in answer to the first question, of course, I'm worried and we're worried. If we're not, that's keeping your head in the sand and basically not managing your risk. Just as in my previous comments, I mentioned the spectrum of things that we have to manage in our business. So yes, we worry. And I would suggest we were on alert. Of course, we're on alert every time anything happens in the region, anywhere near our pipelines. We have regional security, we have very good communications, we have very good interactions and information both internally and also with the government. But what do we do about that? We get nervous, of course. We pay more attention to the events as they're occurring, sometimes day by day or hour by hour, and we think about our contingency plans and our readiness. But that is part of managing oil and gas business and pipelines in particular, as we which is time to areas. You raise your tension levels and you ready yourselves more for the waves.
I didn't understand the question quite. Can you summarize the second question again quickly?
The question is about, as experts, can you say that the gas pipeline that goes through Georgia is ever used as a leverage for pressuring decisions that officials in this face?
Pressuring decisions where?
On regional issues, on different issues that it comes to, let me clarify even more precisely. When it comes to different issues with regards to Armenia or other countries around.
You mean the pressure stemming from Azerbaijan?
From Baku, or yeah, because we've been seeing many of the officials flying to Baku or to Ankara for that matter to make, whether it's consultations or other things.
Well, I have to say from my standpoint, which probably comes from ignorance, it seems to me the leverage is the other way. It's Azerbaijan that's at risk. Azerbaijan, that is the main investor in a $45 billion project. It is Azerbaijan's gas assets that may become stranded if there is no outlet. So in some ways, it's leverage, if you want to call it that, but I prefer to think of it as a cooperative relationship where there's mutual gain on the part of, in this case, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, because all three countries would benefit, and Azerbaijan most of all. So I'm not sure that with the panel, care comment?
I have a point that if you have such a kind of pipelines and energy resources, you're selling it, as a country, if you would like to use it as a leverage or, how can I say, threat or weapon, you can, but just once. Then you lost your transfer or any kind of relationship, and this was the case for Russia as well. And in case of Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan is trying to be part of the international community and making money and whatever. And then if you would like to use your natural resources or gas and oil or your pipelines, your territory as a weapon against third party, you can use it just once, and then afterwards you have to pay the bill, and this is not smart. Therefore, I don't think so.
And it has actual financial consequences because you would have signed ship or pay agreements with buyers at the end of the pipe.
I agree with Professor Celikpala because for two reasons. The first of all, yes, the government can use it as a leverage in all decision making in the but you can use once or twice, and then it's become a distrustful relationship. And in fact, let's say, not only the Baku-Kyrgyzstan or other project is connecting Azerbaijan with Georgia, also this is a region of interdependent relationship. So, for example, in 2003, in fact, for example, before the Rose Revolution, Georgia government was ready to sell its national distribution grid to Gazprom 3, $100 million. So, but today, except that Russia has already companies, so the so far Georgia is operating in Georgian territory, and not only as a gasification of the Georgian territories and as a part of the distribution of the gas to Georgian territory. So that's why it is not a case in this regard. And the second fact that, let's say, in 2006 or 2007, when there was a shortage in Georgia, when Russia did not make the Georgian government, in fact, the Turkish government is extended itself just to give its part of the gas to the Georgian side. So it's such kind of a relationship that they had to use. And in my mind, the Georgia, the geo in Georgia is a much more important proposition than geo in geopolitics.
While I agree with the panel in terms of the strategic importance of interdependence, very much a win-win relationship, there is one notable exception in terms of looking at this leverage. It's the position of Azerbaijan and Turkey in terms of SOCAR, in terms of Azerbaijan's role as the #1 foreign direct investor in Turkey, in terms of what happened to us, in terms of Azerbaijan actually preventing Armenia and Turkey from normalizing relations a few years ago. And that energy position was used to impact and impede Turkish policymakers at the time.
Yeah, that really is an interesting question. I guess Azerbaijan's position would be that it's fine with Armenia and Turkey normalizing relationship subject to a peaceful resolution of the Karabakh conflict, but not without it. John Roberts, you get the last question.
Two questions, very quick. On Iran and Armenia, do you see any sign in Armenia of an Iranian policy of not using gas directly, but indirectly as an export in the form of electricity? And secondly, with regard to Russia, does anybody think that one of the main reasons for the termination of the Turkish Stream approach may have been simply Russia was running out of cash, as we saw with the problems that they were having in funding and completing their massive project to actually get gas to the Black Sea from central Russia? Any comments on that?
Actually, very good, John. In fact, it should be one of the subjects of your next articles in terms of what we didn't have time for. We talked about Russia's policy in terms of blocking or preventing Armenia using a potential deepening gas and energy ties with Iran. However, there is an Iranian response and an Armenian response in terms of looking indirectly how to laterally circumvent Moscow in terms of pursuing other areas. One notable example statistically is 90% of all the investment in solar and renewable energy in Armenia comes from Iran, interestingly, where to the credit of Washington and the American position has looked the other way. But also, Rouhani, the president of Iran, is now coming to Armenia in the coming months, and this is a high agenda item in ways to indirectly address the gas issue and actually pursue much more than electricity. More than that, it's a public forum, and I wouldn't want to speculate.
Well, I'd be interested in the panelists' views on Turkish Stream or South Stream, and where it might actually land. I have to say, I was in Moscow a couple of weeks ago, and I asked Russian analysts about the various pipeline and LNG projects that Russia has. Some of them are really fantastic. My favorite is Stop LNG. And that given limited resources, which are the most important projects to Russia to devote its limited financial resources to complete as soon as possible. And I have to tell you that Turkish Stream or South Stream never even came up in conversation among the most important projects. But I would say that there are certain sunk capital in Turkish Stream and South Stream, and there may be people thinking about how to take advantage of the sunk capital. The pipe is sitting in Varna right now. As an example, the contract beside them to pay at least the first pipe. So maybe not 63 BCM system, but one strand of either Turkish Stream or South Stream is conceivable. It's certainly in the mind of some Bulgarian politicians, foremost the Prime Minister, has not completely given up on South Stream yet. But that's an interesting point. I tend to believe that Russia is focused foremost on Nord Stream 2 right now, for reasons I gave this morning, but also the Power Siberia project, ultimately to China, which is maybe more medium term. And these other projects, as I say, the political projects never die, but
some Greece inclined to put it as Greek sea, and then if Greece managed to find some infrastructure money or some investment money to get the question, then there's that big project, but who's going to buy this gas? Or I have no idea, therefore, it's not an issue in Turkey.
Well, who might get by that gas? When we talk about Ukraine transit, so Nord Stream 2 would only replace a portion of Ukraine transit, would not replace Ukraine transit through to Southeast Europe or the Balkan route to Turkey, the first route to Turkey. So one strand of a South Stream or Turkish Stream would allow Gazprom to supply Southeastern Europe without going to Ukraine at all. Without that kind of pipeline, some Ukraine transit would still be necessary. Much smaller volume than today. Anyone else like to contribute on the subject? Yeah, please.
I'm going to just take advantage of the fact that it's the last question as well, and bring this back a little bit to the region. I'm not going to comment specifically on whether it's not happening because of lack of financing, but I think it is something that I touched on, and we touched on quite lightly here today. But we have brought it has been brought out the realization of the current prices of energy, basically of oil and gas, in particular oil, and we all know that it's low. It's interesting when we start out saying, hey, we're over 50. When in fact $50 a year ago was not a good situation. 50 is not a good situation. The industry, my company, and pretty much every leading company and every producing country in the world is that their sources of cash are not matching their uses of cash, and that's a reality. So Russia is no different. So I think we can all speculate on our own, but just as companies are having to do, countries are having to do, you have to prioritize and have to say where are we going to put our investments. And I think this brings us right back to the reality that's occurring right now, right here in Georgia, in Turkey, in Azerbaijan, on the southern border. There's heavy investment occurring, tens of thousands of jobs, billions of dollars committed, billions of dollars spent. We're within 2 years of starting, basically. We're not there yet, but I think in a time that the industry and the companies and the countries, not as much Georgia in this case, but the producing countries in particular are stressed, and to stay in the course as the companies and the countries in Azerbaijan basically in what is a very, very long-term investment. So you have to see through these cycles. We do have cycles. It is a cyclical industry. Each one has its own shape, but this investment was made with good, secure, long-term thinking, and we just got to stay the course on it.
That's a great point, Chris, that in a lower price environment, cost-efficient transportation becomes even more important than before, because otherwise you affect that back to wellhead from one whereas the longer economic, which also says in some ways that politically desirable projects, for whatever reason, if they are not cost efficient, as some projects we just discussed are not, are likely to be postponed for quite some time during this environment. And so Georgia's location advantage is even more critical today than before. Something I said when I was here in September is that low price environment makes Georgia, in some ways, offering its transit facility even more important to companies and investors like others. Thank the panel very much, and please join me in thanking the panel. There may be other questions you can